In today's biased news, U.S. political turmoil threatens military aid to Ukraine, Israel intensifies its genocide in southern Gaza, and the world hits a grim climate milestone. The White House has issued a stark warning, indicating that it's running out of money and resources to supply additional weapons to Ukraine in its war against Russia. In a letter addressed to congressional leaders on Monday, Shalonda Young, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, explained the critical situation, stating that without prompt congressional action, the government would exhaust its funds to procure weapons and equipment for Ukraine by the end of the year, less than a month from now. The letter revealed that approximately $111 billion previously allocated for Ukrainian military aid had already been utilized. Young urged Congress to approve another $100 billion in supplemental funding in October for Ukraine, border security, and Israel. Young elaborated that as of mid-November, the Pentagon had exhausted 97% of the $62 billion it received. However, the approval of additional funding faces complications in Congress. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson expressed confidence in the approval of funding for Ukraine and Israel, but suggested that they be handled separately. He proposed linking Ukraine funding to changes in U.S. border policy, a condition that may pose challenges for approval, especially among Democrats. The National Defense Industrial Strategy, set to be released in the coming weeks, warns that the U.S. defense industrial base lacks the capacity, capability, responsiveness, and resilience needed to meet military production needs at the required speed and scale. Many commentators, including officials in Ukraine, suspect that this is the part where Ukraine gets left out to dry, as the left said would happen from the beginning. Of course, regardless of whether the money goes to funding proxy wars or genocide, there are no talks of using any of this money to better the material conditions of the US population. The conversation exclusively revolves around military expenditure and stopping immigrants from coming into the country. Continuing with Eastern European news, Russian President Putin is set to bolster his influence in the Middle East by visiting the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, followed by hosting the Iranian president in Moscow. The discussions during these visits will center around bilateral relations, the Palestinian crisis, and cooperation in the oil market. A Kremlin spokesperson mentioned that talks on oil market cooperation are a regular part of discussions within the OPEC Plus format, where Moscow collaborates with these countries. Putin's efforts to strengthen ties in the Middle East are seen as a response to Western attempts to isolate Russia through sanctions for its actions in Ukraine. Despite an ICC arrest warrant against Putin, neither the UAE nor Saudi Arabia, having not signed the ICC's founding treaty, would be obliged to arrest him. Putin also positions Russia as a potential mediator in what they call the Israel-Palestine crisis, criticizing US diplomacy and suggesting Moscow's neutral role due to its amicable ties with both parties. The Israeli military has intensified its offensive in southern and central Gaza, sparking some of the most intense fighting to date. The attacks have targeted homes sheltering displaced Palestinians, refugee camps, and left thousands of people with nowhere to go. Israeli tanks have pushed deep into Khan Yunis, attempting to reach the center of the city. This vicious incursion has forced hundreds of people to flee the area under heavy aerial bombardment. Analysts suggest that this phase of the military operation could last 4 to 5 weeks, culminating around the middle of January, potentially seeing the heaviest fighting of the last 2 months in the next few days. The situation for Palestinians is becoming increasingly dire, with limited options for relocation. The possibility of crossing into Egypt is unlikely given the current circumstances. More than 1.5 million people are squeezed into this densely populated pocket of land, facing relentless bombardment and displacement. The Israeli occupation forces continue to intentionally bomb the so-called safe zones they themselves told the Palestinians to flee to. Relief organizations, including Doctors Without Borders, warn of dwindling essential supplies in hospitals. They highlighted the critical situation at Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, where 700 patients are admitted, and new patients continue to arrive. The overall death toll in Gaza since October 7th has risen to at least 16,248. The genocide shows no signs of abating. The world has hit a new record, and not in a good way. This year, new heat records for 6 consecutive months have set the stage for the hottest year on record, since we began tracking the data in the mid-19th century. The Northern Hemisphere also experienced its warmest autumn on record. The report reveals that November's global temperatures were 0.85 degrees Celsius warmer than the average over the last 30 years, contributing to 2023 being, on average, 1.46 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This places the year close to the 1.5 degrees international threshold set by the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Without systemic change, we'll be over the limit very soon. And in somewhat positive news for the day, A significant but contentious milestone was reached in low-carbon aviation as a plane powered by sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, completed a transatlantic flight from London Heathrow to JFK. The fuel, primarily derived from food waste, marks progress in the challenging task of decarbonizing aviation. While SAF can reduce life cycle emissions by up to 70% compared to traditional kerosene, some critics argue it falls short of being a truly green solution, and there is currently insufficient supply to meet global demand. The Aviation Environment Federation emphasizes the need for reducing overall emissions by flying less until genuine zero-emission fuels and technologies become available. That's all for today. We'll be back on Monday with more news. If you appreciate the work we're doing, consider becoming a patron to support the show. All patrons get early access to analysis episodes and an audio version of the news. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.